I'm a Star Wars fan. Always have been, always will be. I've always maintained that I was born at the most amazing time that any Star Wars fan could have been, the 90s. I was one of the lucky few who was able to witness the entire Star Wars saga, the way Lucas intended, without the shroud of nostalgia clouding my judgment. I was thrown into the world of Star Wars during the special edition re-releases of 4, 5 and 6, and then, a couple of years later, I was back in that same theatre as The Phantom Menace exploded onto screens around the world. You see, the ideal time in Star Wars history. Not quite old enough to have had the excruciatingly long wait between the original release and the prequels, but not young enough to have been exposed to episodes 1 to 3 before witnessing the beauty of the original trilogy. But as much as I do look back favourably on my Star Wars experience, there's one thing that's always bugged me as someone who had grown up outside of the original hype. This is, of course, a gripe that most Star Wars fans have. Ever since the release of those special edition films that pulled me into this fantastical universe, it has been absolutely near on impossible to find any copies of the genuine, unaltered, original Star Wars films from the 70s and 80s. I mean, seriously, have you ever tried tracking these things down? Because I've spent years with zero luck. Whenever I'd get my hands on a DVD or VHS claiming to be the originals, it would turn out to be just the special editions or some crappy fan edit made to look like it was the originals. You know, a little colour grading here and there, dull things down a bit. It was obviously not the genuine artifact. Even an untrained eye could see that. I mean, the Han scene alone. Come on. After spending more money than I'm comfortable admitting in my hunt for these things, I eventually just gave up, resigning myself to the fact that I'll never be lucky enough to witness Lucas's original masterpieces. Such a shame, I thought, a true relic of film history, lost to time itself. Fast forward to May the 4th, one of my favourite days of the entire year. I had just finished my annual Star Wars marathon tradition, and as I was carefully placing my cherished Return of the Jedi Blu-ray disc back into its shiny case, I got a call from my friend Ben. Ben and I had grown up together, and like me, he shared a deep love for Star Wars as well. I picked up the call. "Hey dude, what's up?" "I'm guessing you've just finished watching too." "Huh, you know it, brother. What order did you watch in this year?" 1 to 6. Just the boring old chronological. You know me, creature of habit, eh? How about you?" "I went with something a little different this year. Have you ever heard of the flashback order?" What's the flashback order?" Okay. So, get this. You start with episode 4, right? Then, you go into episode 5. But, before hitting Jedi, you watch the prequels as flashbacks. See, most of the spoilers are pretty much out of the way by the end of Empire. You still get to start with the OT, just as Lucas intended, but you avoid that weird, janky look of going from the epic CGI effects straight into the more dated look of the OT. Return of the Jedi's visuals are advanced enough that it kind of blends quite well coming off the back of the prequels. And best of all, you get to finish the saga on a high note. "Dude, you might just be a genius. I'm totally trying that next time." Yeah. To say we were nerds would be quite the understatement. Anyway, turns out Ben was not just calling to talk sci-fi. He wanted to invite me to dinner. Looking around my apartment and realizing that the only food in this house were the leftover snacks from my Star Wars Day marathon, I politely accepted. We hit up a favorite restaurant of ours, a little family-owned place downtown. It was kinda musty and run down, but the owners had been there for decades, and their passion for food had not faded one little bit. Sitting down and preparing to order my usual, something strange suddenly pinged in my brain. It must have registered somewhat subconsciously, something barely visible, right off in the farthest corners of my peripheral vision. Because out of nowhere, I was overcome by the irresistible urge to turn my head and look at whatever my brain was screaming at me to investigate. As my eyes slowly made my way over to a small bookshelf behind the counter, I was overcome by a feeling of sheer disbelief. My eyes worked their way down what I was witnessing, picking up one little detail at a time. CBS, Fox, Video, a red S, followed by TAR, Wars, all in red. No caption, no mention of Episode 4, just a classic Star Wars logo, all in red, and beside it, two more instantly recognizable logos: The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. I sat absolutely frozen in my seat, overcome by a feeling of complete and utter disbelief. I decided in that moment that these had to be mine. I didn't say a word to Ben. I knew how badly he wanted to find these as well. I felt a bit bad keeping this from him, knowing how happy owning these would make both of us. But I wanted them. Besides, I wasn't even sure if they were real yet, or if the owners were even willing to part with them. If I could just get a hold of them first, then maybe he could watch them some other time. After we finished our dinner, we each went our separate ways. But rather than taking a right and heading back to my apartment, I took a left, circled the block, and went straight back into that restaurant. I caught them just as they were about to turn the sign around to closed. I got straight down to business. Overcome with sheer excitement, I blurted out, "How much do you want for that?" Kathy, one of the owners, lifted up a glass angel statue on the bookshelf, pointing to it, rather confused. No, the tapes, the Star Wars collection. Is it the originals?" "Oh, this? I have no idea. They've been shifted from one place to another around here for so many years now. I assumed they belonged to my husband, but he has no idea where they came from." "Arthur," she called out, beckoning her husband. "The young man wants to know if he can buy this." I stared on intently as he looked the tapes over. "Take 'em, mate," he said bluntly. "No good to us. We don't even have a player of any kind. We barely get enough time to watch a bit of telly here and there, let alone sit down and watch 3 films. He let out a small chuckle. I could not believe what I was hearing. If these really were legit, I had just scored copies of the original Star Wars for free. Thanking the couple profusely, I practically ran back home to my apartment, box set in hand, eager to check these out. Bursting in through my door, I fired up my VHS. Yes, I do still have a VHS player. Not only am I a bit of a classic film collector, but I've spent that much time hunting for copies of these things. I needed to have something around to test them on. Having had no luck so far in my quest, I silently prayed that tonight would be the night. I popped in the first tape, simply labeled Star Wars. I sat in my chair, the suspense killing me, as the silent title flashed across the screen. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. I couldn't believe it. Yes, the bright yellow Star Wars logo flashed up on screen, alone. Nothing else. No Episode 4. No A New Hope. This was the real deal. This was Star Wars 1977 on VHS. And as I continued to watch, this was only reaffirmed as the events of the film played out. Oh yeah, Han shot first, all right. I continued on with my second Star Wars marathon for this day, marveling at what audiences across the world first witnessed all those years ago. Finishing up the first movie, I excitedly popped Empire into the VCR, absolutely glued to the screen, unable to keep my eyes off it. It must have been about halfway through Empire that things begin to feel a bit strange. I didn't know if perhaps it was a combination of being overtired and the weird effects of watching films I'd seen a million times in an older format kinda doing funny things to my brain. But something just felt not quite right. I slapped myself a little, shaking it off, as I watched Luke make the descent into the Dagobah system. Something about this was mesmerizing, an entirely different feel to the special edition somehow. It was almost darker. I began to feel a bit uneasy actually, as Luke traipsed around the murky swamp, searching for Yoda. This scene appeared to be playing out for much longer than I remembered it. The scene continued to drag on, with no sign of Yoda appearing, as he normally would. Luke just walked around, aimlessly looking for whatever it was he was searching for. Until finally, he found it. Or randomly stumbled upon it. It was the cave. You know, the dark side cave. Luke began to hesitantly walk towards it. Okay, this was weird. I knew that Lucas made some changes from the originals, but this was wildly different to how the film was supposed to play out. I began to feel a bit disappointed. It seems I had stumbled upon yet another fake copy after all. And then Luke turned around and looked directly into the camera. This was not fake. Either that, or there's a frighteningly similar Mark Hamill imposter out there somewhere. He stared straight into my eyes. Come with me. Let's go, Luke said, in a rather monotone voice, not at all characteristic of the young Jedi. I felt further mesmerized by this invitation, and I stood from my chair as Luke walked into the cave. The strangest sensation overcame me. Like right here was exactly where I needed to be. In my living room, yet somehow right there in that cave with Luke. I watched as Luke pulled out and ignited his lightsaber. As he did so, I gripped tightly my own makeshift saber. Luke continued onwards, further into the darkness. And that is when I heard it. The faintest sound of footsteps, accompanied by heavy breathing. Strangely, the footsteps echoed and reverberated, both through my TV's soundbar, yet somehow, in my own head, and all around me. I gripped my warrior's weapon tight as I prepared for the approach of the Dark Lord, copying Luke's every action. As he braced, so did I. As he readied his battle stance, so too did I. Without even a second of warning, Vader swung at Luke with all his might, his saber connecting with Skywalker's with an electric crash. Luke easily parried the attack, swinging at Vader full force as I continued mimicking his every move. In the strangest twist of events, Luke quickly spun around, returning with a powerful underarm strike, slicing off Vader's saber hand as the mechanical monstrosity cried out in pain. I had no idea what was happening or how this was happening, but I didn't care. I was absolutely enslaved by the mysterious events flashing across my set. Shaking off a little, I readied my pretend lightsaber once again, just as Luke did on screen. Vader, ever the master of the Force, quickly pulled his red lightsaber back into his remaining hand, igniting it, just in time to block Luke's next flurry of attacks, which I copied with equal precision and power. This fight continued on for a while. Luke, clearly overpowering his father, despite his lack of training, somehow fighting with all the power and skill of Anakin himself in Episode 3. And whenever he would turn towards the screen, for the tiniest of moments, I could see the faintest hint of yellow in his eyes. As the fight reached a crescendo, Luke struck at Vader with all the anger and hatred of a lifetime of dark side training, connecting with limb after limb. First, the legs, rendering Vader useless on the ground. I watched on, equally disturbed and somehow excited, as Luke did not stop there. He continued hacking away at Vader. Me, still in this strange trance, continued copying Luke's every movement. Slash. An arm flailed off to the side as Vader's cries became more pained, more human, with every blow. Slash. Another arm. Slash. As Luke burned through his torso. Slash. As Vader's head rolled away helplessly, just as it had done in the original film. But when the helmet exploded, Luke did not see his own face within, as he had always done. No. As the smoke cleared, I saw my friend's face. Ben stared back at me, clear as day. This was enough to shake me from my stupor. I had gotten a little carried away here. I slowly released my tight grip on the kitchen knife as I glanced around at Ben's dismembered body all over my apartment floor. Slowly, I began to pick him up, piece by piece by piece. He had obviously come here with the intention of stealing my films. That was clear. He had no right. These were mine. I had earned them. I only did what I had to do to protect them. After picking up and disposing of Ben entirely, I sat back down on my couch and stared into the television screen, which had now faded to black. In the darkness of my cave, I mean, my apartment. I continued staring into the void of the now lifeless television set. And you know what? I swear, for just the briefest of moments, I could make out the faintest shine of yellow, staring right back at me. Star Wars Day is my life. You know, if you were to describe the joy, the cheer, the excitement of Christmas Day without mentioning Christmas, in my mind, I'd probably just assume you were talking about May the 4th. That was my day. Me and my group of buddies, we would take the entire day off every year to celebrate it. We had been doing this since high school, and I'm pretty sure both our teachers back then and our employers now may have picked up on the fact that our lame-ass sick day excuses, which just happened to fall on the exact same date every year, may not be entirely genuine. But credit to them, they always let it slide. This year's May the 4th was going to be epic. Most years we would have these casual get-togethers. We'd put on some food, put some beers on ice and just watch the movies. But this year, we were going to do something a bit more hands-on. You see, our friend Kyle and his girlfriend, Heather, they were avid gamers. They had this amazing setup in their basement. There were 3 lines of desks set up in perfect unison. At each desk, back-to-back, fully decked out MSI gaming rigs. 12 of them in total, in fact. Why did they need so many for themselves, you ask? Well, they didn't really. Being passionate gamers, they would often host these social gaming nights for pretty much whoever wanted to come. It was quite a cool initiative for the town, and Heather even scored some airtime on the local news to talk about the events they'd put on. We lived in a small town, so they always had enough rigs to cater for the 10 or so people who wanted to come and game. If they ever had more, they had these random consoles and retro systems and stuff like that for people to keep themselves occupied while they waited for a PC to free up. It really was an amazing setup. And this year, for our May the 4th celebrations, we intended to make full use of it. We had planned to play Battlefront 2 online literally all day, complete with coolers full of Mountain Dew and beer, and the most gut-rotting snacks you can imagine. This was set to be a LAN party for the ages. Yeah, I hear the groans. I know, Battlefront 2 is not exactly beloved in the Star Wars community, but we just wanted a modern Star Wars game that we could play together. We thought about booting up the Old Republic, but we had some problems messing around with EA accounts not playing nice with Steam, and, well, it was just a headache we didn't want. When you get one day off from work to celebrate your favorite day with your friends, you want something that's just gonna work, you know? So that's what we settled on. That is, until I got a call from Heather at around 8 p.m. on May 3rd. I picked up the phone and greeted my friend, excited to talk about our plans for the next day. "Hey, what's up?" I said.
"Dude, I found something cool,"
Heather replied.
"Let me ask you, do you really want to spend your entire day tomorrow playing Battlefront? That game's a shit show at best."
Yeah, I know it is. But I mean, it was the best pick of a bad bunch, right? We all decided.
"Yeah, we did. But check this out. I found a Fallout mod."
Fallout. I mean, I guess the setting can be maybe similar. But I don't know about playing Fallout on Star Wars Day. It doesn't really fit, you know?
No, dude. I found a Star Wars mod for Fallout 4.
Oh, you're talking about Galaxy at War. Yeah, I know that one, but it'd still be kind of weird. I mean, Fallout 4 doesn't even have online. We'd all just be kind of doing our own thing. Wouldn't it be kind of a buzzkill?
Mate, shut up and listen for a second. I'm looking at the mod right here in front of my eyes. F4 SW Online is called. I had to contact the uploader to clarify, but if this works, this mod will essentially turn Fallout 4 into a modern-day Star Wars MMO.
Wait, seriously? How cool would that be? Do you think you can get it to work?
I can sure try. I'm gonna download the mod now and get it set up for tomorrow. I'll let you know in the morning if it worked, when you guys get here. Otherwise, we can always go back to Plan A.
Sounds great. I'll see you tomorrow, Heather. And with that, the call ended. I spent a couple more hours scrolling through Facebook and Instagram. You know, as you, for some unknown reason, feel the urge to do before sleeping. Eventually, noticing the clock tick nearer to midnight, I put my phone onto the charge, and I went to sleep, excited to wake up and start our Star Wars Day celebration. My alarm went off at 7 a.m. sharp, and I sprung out of bed, ready for a day of gaming. As I pulled on my favorite Empire Strikes Back t-shirt, I was suddenly reminded of the phone call with Heather last night, and this mystery Fallout mod she'd discovered. I wondered how she'd found it. I had searched plenty of mod sites for Star Wars themed mods, but the only functional ones I'd come across were simple lightsaber mods, and of course, Galaxy at War. But that was nothing like what Heather had described. Anyway, hopefully she'd managed to get it working. It sounded amazing. The walk to Heather and Kyle's place was a short one. We lived a couple of blocks away from each other. A quiet walk through a quiet part of town with not much going on. Your typical urban sprawl. A little convenience store and coffee shop sat halfway between our houses, which made for a nice meet-up spot. I stopped in and grabbed my usual chai latte, no sugar. After that, I continued on down to Kyle's house. Upon arriving, Kyle and the guys had already gathered for our busy day of gaming ahead. Life responsibilities for the geeks and nerdy. We weren't bothered. Star Wars was our passion. You don't hear us judging people who choose to sit in front of the telly all day and watch football. And plenty of folks do that every weekend. We only do this once a year. And we were going to make the most of it. As I stood there, sipping my chai latte like a pretentious dick, I noticed Heather's absence. I'd been keen to ask her about the mod, so I called out to Kyle, who was busy on the other side of the room getting the food and drinks prepped for the day. I asked him, "Hey, where's Heather? Is she not joining us today?" "Oh, nah, dude," he replied. "She left this note on her laptop for me." Well, that was very Heather style. Being the techie girl, handwritten notes be damned. On the laptop sat a simple Word document, which read, "Morning, I've been called into the office. Sorry guys. But hey, I got that mod working. It's up and running on all the rigs. I've set up temporary Steam accounts for all of you. Just load up the game and you should be good to go. Have fun." It's in these moments I need to check myself. There had always been an unspoken, yet very much acknowledged by the both of us, pang of envy that Kyle had been the one to end up with Heather. We had both had a huge crush on her since, well, the first day we met her in primary school. She was, and still is, beautiful, in the true sense of that word. But, as fate would have it, she only ever had eyes for him. Their bond was undeniable. If there had ever been any doubt about that, perhaps I may have tried a little harder. But it was obvious to everyone. These two were among the rare specimens of our world who, through some stroke of universal blessing, managed to be born in the same time, place, and move in the same circles as their soulmate. All told, I was truly happy for them, and happy that we were all still friends regardless of any messy feelings. As always, I brushed these thoughts aside and focused on what mattered. Star Wars Day. Finally, it was our day. I made my way over to one of the rigs, testing the chair to make sure that I wouldn't get landed with the infamous squeaky one. As I sunk into my battle station for the day, I smiled to myself as I listened to the beautiful sound of Kyle pouring ice over our supply of beers and Mountain Dew. This was going to be a good day. The guys joined me one by one. Brad took a seat next to me, the chair squeaking like a banshee as he lowered himself down onto it. He gave me a knowing, slightly resentful look as he did so. He knew. Oh, he knew. Oh well, early bird gets the good chair, I guess. We all settled in and booted up our rigs. The glorious ambience of beer caps cracking and potato chips crunching, accompanying the chime of the Windows startup. I loaded up Steam, as did my friends, and we all launched Fallout 4. Upon launching the game, I was met with a pop-up. You are about to start Fallout 4 with the mod F4SW Online active. This mod will significantly change your gameplay experience, and you may be becoming unbalanced. Proceeding? Yes/no. What the hell? What a weird introduction. The signatures at the bottom appeared to be some kind of Eastern European, so I guess the devs were non-English speakers. Unbalanced meaning the game could become unstable, I guess. I looked around the room, noticing my friends looking as confused as I was. Click yes then? Asked Kyle, and I shrugged, nodding my head. Guess so. What's the worst that could happen? We all clicked yes to proceed, and we were booted into full screen mode as Fallout 4 loaded up. Instead of the typical menu screen, however, we were met with an apocalyptic-style depiction of Coruscant, the Jedi Temple, and the Senate building in ruins, as dark clouds hung overhead. The music was weird. It was not the Fallout music, but it wasn't Star Wars either. It was this kind of generic mishmash of both, but slower, kind of gloomy. There wasn't much to do in the menu. There were only 3 selections: Start, Options, or Load Game. Options didn't really present any choices other than mapping your controls, which remained largely the same as the original Fallout 4. Aside from some extra, additional options, tapping the F key, for example, would supposedly activate Force Push. I navigated back to the main menu and selected Start Game, having no other real option. I had nothing to load up after all. Upon clicking Start, the menu faded away to black. After a quick few seconds, some familiar blue text faded in. Many years ago, in a universe far away. Okay, near enough, I guess. And then it faded back out again. Wow, they really nailed the feel of the classic Star Wars intro. The logo was picture perfect as it zoomed up into the black expanse of space. The text then continued to scroll. It read, "It is a dark time for the galaxy. 2 years after civil war broke out, the evil Count Dooku, desperate for victory at any cost, has unleashed the ultimate weapon of destruction upon Coruscant and many surrounding systems. Outlying planets have devolved into chaos as the threat of complete and total annihilation looms heavy over the galaxy. A small team of surviving Jedi have fled to the most isolated corners of the capital in an attempt to regroup and overthrow the separatist forces who now control the galaxy." Pretty cool setup, I thought. I really liked the way they had incorporated the nuclear apocalypse theme into the canon Star Wars timeline. So, if I was understanding this correctly, this would be some kind of alternative universe setting, one that takes place between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Upon completion of the opening crawl, the camera panned down, just like it did in the films, and focused in on what looked like the ruins of an ancient temple. The scene then cut to what appeared to be 2 young Jedi warriors, a boy and a girl, standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror. Behind them stands Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. Okay, cool. So this is basically the Fallout 4 character creation screen. I selected the male character and I began my customization. Nothing too crazy. I don't get too deep with these. As long as the hair color's the same and the face looks kinda similar to my own, I'm pretty happy with that. I changed the hair to mid-length black and sprinkled a couple of freckles across the face, and that was me done. The rest of the guys spent a bit longer on theirs, but I was keen to get out and explore the world. Once we were all done creating our characters, the screen suddenly glitched to black before cutting back in. We were now all in this ruined temple together, standing before Obi-Wan. Wow, looks like the mod was actually the real deal. It was a little glitchy, sure, but for all intents and purposes, it did exactly what it said on the box. Fallout 4 had effectively become an open-world, online multiplayer Star Wars game. The game, for the most part, played out as you would expect. Rather than starting the game before the bombs go off, you begin in a world that is already ruined. As we all stood before Obi-Wan, we noticed that he was talking. I guessed it must have been a bit difficult to do cutscenes in this mod, given the online element. Master Kenobi gave a quick speech. "We are the only survivors. We must gather our forces, etc., etc." The end of the speech, though, that was a little strange. After he'd finished the main part, he would only repeat one line. "Whatever you do, it's already too late." This was very out of character for him, I thought. He was always the guy full of optimism and hope in the films. But then again, I guess a nuclear weapon wiping out half the galaxy probably changes one's outlook a bit. From here, things unfolded in a very Fallout kind of way, just with subtle changes. Instead of going to Concord to find friends and rescue the surviving Minutemen, you're sent by Obi-Wan to the Great Western Sea. Your mission is to gather a platoon of clones who had sent word they were pinned down. Upon getting them back to the temple safely, you were then ordered by their captain, I guess this guy replaces Preston Garvey, to head out to Barca Town and assist someone named Whisper, who actually turns out to be a Sith. He gave me a bit of a fright the first time I met him, spinning around to reveal his yellow eyes. But as it turned out, the Sith are actually your allies in this game, albeit reluctant ones. Even when they return to the temple, Obi-Wan and the other Jedi aren't put off by them, and they never attack them, or vice versa. I guess it kinda makes sense canonically too. Even in the Clone Wars, Darth Maul didn't want Palpatine in power any more than the Jedi did. We continued on through this game, completing static quests here and there. It was all very simple. Many of the Fallout quest lines were simply re-scripted and reskinned, but they all took place in this very Star Wars-esque environment, interchanged with Star Wars set pieces and characters, and even music. They even had the odd starship flying overhead. It was a very immersive experience, and I was thoroughly enjoying myself. You went through the game largely as an individual, but with your fellow players by your side. The only thing was, this removed the option of various dialogue choices, since I guess it would be too difficult for 5 or 6 people to choose different choices and still have the game operate as normal. There was also no actual cutscenes during dialogue, so the main character's voice would just kind of echo in from the void. The game started getting really strange when it came time for us to leave Coruscant. I guess that this part of the game was essentially when Preston informs you that it's time to take back the castle. We all followed a waypoint to a dark corner of the temple, where the clone captain was waiting for us. He told us it was time we shifted our forces to a stronger hold, off-planet, somewhere less likely to draw attention. We were instructed to build a starship, one capable of light-speed travel, and a new subsection was added to the temple's workshop menu. This was actually quite fun, but the issue came when too many people were trying to build at once. It got messy, so we had to opt for just one of us to do the job. I scored the privilege, and I got to work building our ship. This part was much like the vault building DLC. You had these huge set pieces you could click together in order to create a massive spaceship. You had various hulls, wings, cockpits, bridges, etc. Upon completion, you would snap it onto a generator in order to refuel the ship. Sadly, as I expected, space travel was not an addition to the mod. You just kind of approached the ship and pressed E to activate it, then selected a fast travel destination. At this point, a few expanded destinations were added to the map upon selecting the ship, one of them being off-planet. It was not a system name that I recognized, and I've read all of the expanded universe. The system was called Ruad. I of course recognized this historically in real-world terms, but it had definitely never been a part of the Star Wars universe. Anyway, I selected it, and off we went. Upon reaching the Ruad system, this is where things in the game got really weird. As soon as we spawned in beside the ship, we were met with a landscape that was just downright wrong. Mist that looked more like red clouds encapsulated the surface of the planet. Shanty-like buildings popped up randomly from the earth. Gnarled trees hung down from the sky. Yes, down, seemingly hovering there. But their roots, they extended upwards indefinitely. In a way, it kind of resembled the Dagobah system, with its swampy, foggy setting. but the colours were way off. Where Dagobah was gloomy and murky, this planet was more of a colourful setting. Imagine shades of red and yellow and a purple sky extending over the horizon. Slowly, we began to explore this planet. Me, heading west towards the looming cityscape, and each of my friends taking their own path. As we progressed, I occasionally heard them gasp, and I soon saw why, jumping back and gasping myself. It was twisted, disfigured, a downright awful creature. I only thought to look around as my character let out a grunt, signaling that he had lost health, and I looked down to see this thing shuffling off on its hands and knees into the long grass. "What the hell was that?" one of my friends exclaimed. I chased after it, but I couldn't find it anywhere. As we progressed through the Ruad system, these things would pop up seemingly at random, crawling out of patches of grass or thick swamps, biting our characters' legs before scuttling off. It made traversing this planet quite unsettling, as you'd never see them coming. I was nearing the city when I heard my friend Mike shout, "What the hell?" Looking over to him, I noticed his screen was on the Windows desktop now. He shouted again, "One of those things just crawled up my back, and the game booted me." I scooted my chair over, puzzled. "That's weird," I said. "Try booting back in again, maybe." Mike double-clicked his Steam icon, selecting Fallout 4, before being met with another pop-up message. "It's already too late," it read, before booting him back to the desktop again. He stared flabbergasted at his monitor as he tried again and again to launch back into the game, only to be met with that same cryptic message again and again. There was, quite literally, nothing we could do to get his game working again. We tried signing out of Steam and signing back in again with his own Steam account. Same message. He even did a soft reset of Windows. Same message. Shy of doing a full hard reset of the entire operating system, which would have defeated the purpose, as that would uninstall the mod. We tried everything. Eventually, he just gave up and booted up Battlefront 2, while the rest of us continued to play. I continued on towards the city, reaching the outskirts now. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been pretty. Dismembered body parts lay strewn about amongst the rubble. As I walked, one by one, more of my friends met the same fate as Mike. All of them described the same thing happening, the twisted critters crawling up their backs before the game abruptly booted them out, and they were unable to get back in, simply being met with that same message, the one Obi-Wan had recited at the beginning. "It's already too late." I guess I had made the right choice, opting to head for the city. I had not encountered these things since I made it through the swamplands. Before much longer, I was the only one left in the game. As I finally made it to what seemed to be the city center of this gnarled-looking shantytown, my friends were now all locked out, opting instead to play Battlefront 2 together. Honestly, that was beginning to sound preferable. I stumbled through this ramshackle city, looking for any clue of what to do next. Spotting a figure up ahead, I held down the sprint key and I ran towards it. It was Master Windu. He was standing at the entrance to one of the buildings, but he was standing very still. Frozen in place, in fact. His face was morphed into a scowl, his eyes looking eerily off to one side, as though he had seen something coming. He was basically a statue in the game. No movement, not even when you hit him or force pushed him. The worst thing was, I couldn't even get around him. So if there was anything to find in this building, which it looked like there should be, I couldn't even get in there to see it. Okay, nothing more to be gained there. So I decided to turn and head north, up this narrow alleyway, towards what looked like the main building in town. It was massive and looked a little more intact than the rest. I thought maybe, if there was something to find in order to progress the game, it's sure to be in there. As I walked, I noticed scuttling figures again. Kind of like the same ones from the swamp, but these ones, standing upright, darting between the windows of the wrecked buildings. It was actually super unsettling in first-person mode, so I switched the view to third person. As I approached this metal monstrosity, I caught sight of yet another figure. This time a shorter one, very short. Of course, it was Master Yoda. Again, as I progressed towards him, I noticed that he was frozen in place, the same as Master Windu had been. Again, no matter what I did, he couldn't be moved. He was just immortalized there, frozen in time and space. His face was also frozen in an eerie expression. His mouth curled upwards, and his eyes squinted, looking off to one side. No matter which way I walked, I would encounter more characters frozen in place, blocking the entrance to any building that I could hope to enter. The only way to go, besides walking all over the planet looking for something to do, not really possible, due to the existence of those strange crawling things that crashed the game, was to go back to the ship. So I did. And there stood Obi-Wan Kenobi, his hands behind his back, gently swaying back and forth in front of the ship. I could no longer activate the ship either. The only thing I could do was press E to talk to Obi-Wan, who would only say, "Whatever you do, it's already too late." Well, the ship was out. I wasn't going to head back to the city. There was nothing there. I wasn't traversing the long grass, as I didn't want my game to crash. The only other way to go was straight through the giant swamp. I had no idea what was in there. I knew these creatures were in the grass and in the buildings, but I wasn't sure if they were hiding in the swamp. So in I jumped. Swimming through that murky ick, the game's audio got strange. I heard these whiny groans coming in through my speakers, and I began to wonder if perhaps these were the cries of those twisted humanoid things, the ones that had been attacking us. I wondered if they were surrounding my character. I know it's just a game, but the feeling of being out there in those dark waters, potentially being hunted by these things that could end me in such a permanent way, so as not only to kill my character but my game as well. That was frightening. But I made it through unscathed. At the shoreline, I came out into what I can only describe as absolute nothing. I mean, when I crawled out of the swamp, I was standing in the same mystical dark surroundings as the rest of the Ruad system. But when I took a few steps forward, everything just morphed into emptiness, flickering between absolute whiteness and absolute blackness. I took a few steps back and found myself back in the starry, swirling lights of the upside-down forests. Then, a few steps forward, and bam, back into the void. I realized at this point that I was experiencing the effects of a mod unfinished. This must have been as far as they ever got with the development. I felt a pang of disappointment. Despite the weirdness, I was really enjoying it. So, I walked around. What else could I do? I just walked, trudging through thick grass, swamps, and random structures. Until soon enough, I was inevitably found by one of those burn-looking things, climbing its way up my back and opening its mouth behind my neck. Before my game glitched into black and I was booted back to Windows. I don't know why I tried it, but I did. I tried clicking open the game again. But of course, I was met with that same message. It's already too late. I looked around at my friends. Kyle spoke up. They got you too, eh? I gave him a disappointed look. Yeah, I replied. Guess that's it for Star Wars Day, I said, glancing at my watch. 5 p.m. It was about time for us to wind down and start heading back home. Tomorrow, we would have no such luxuries so as to sit around gaming. Tomorrow, it was back to the grind. And it was that thought of the grind that first gave me pause. Hey Kyle, what time's Heather meant to get home? I asked. Actually, should have been about 3 or 4, he replied, curiously. In fact, we both found it odd that we had not even heard from her all day. No messages, no calls, nothing but that note on her laptop. We decided to wait and see if perhaps she was running late. We cracked another couple of beers and played another couple of rounds on Battlefront. It wasn't until another hour had passed and there was still no word from Heather that Kyle tried calling her. And it was only when her phone went directly to voicemail that we became concerned. After calling her office and being told that no, she wasn't there, we entered full-on panic mode. Kyle was in a right state, understandably so, and as he got on the phone to the police, I decided to take one more look at the last real indication we had as to where Heather might be. Her laptop. I walked over to the kitchen bench, where it still sat plugged in, and slowly opened it up to read the note she left. Nothing out of the ordinary there. 3 days? Are you serious? I overheard Kyle say on the phone. The police, I'm guessing, informing him as to the expected timeframes for missing persons reports. It was as I minimized the Word document containing that note that I gestured to him to wait, to not hang up that phone. We had all been so excited for Star Wars Day that we never stopped to question any of it. We had not stopped to think why Heather would have possibly been called into the office when she had been working remotely from home for the last 8 months. No one had even questioned where she had found the mod in the first place. But as we now gazed upon the Tor browser open on her laptop, and the glitchy red and green 90s style website, displaying nothing but a simple file download button, and right underneath it, a ping to her location, it all fell into place. I had thought the language was off. The permissions, an Eastern European look about them. Trafficking's big business in that part of the world. A beautiful girl like Heather, that was high demand. But how do you transport a person out of the country from right under their closest friends' noses? Kyle realised it before I did, probably around the time the phone lines were cut. The mod did not exist for fun. It didn't exist as some kind of random bait. This was done with purpose, with intent. This was orchestrated by a very smart individual who knew our lives, who knew our interests, and specifically wanted her. How do you kidnap someone without any of those closest to them noticing? Well, keeping them nice and distracted for an entire day would certainly go a long way to that goal. Kyle cracked one of the blinds, and as we caught sight of the black vans parked strategically around our neighbourhood, we knew what this was. We knew we were never leaving that house. I sat back down, cracked a cold beer, and booted up Battlefront 2 with my friends. Star Wars Day was my life, and I was going to enjoy what remained of it. My friends and I are big fans of Star Wars, as I'm sure many listening to this can relate to. Every year when May the 4th rolls around, you can bet we all get together religiously to do something super nerdy, like watching all the movies back to back or in some random viewing order just to switch things up. Some years, we like to just hang out and play Star Wars video games all day. As long as it's Star Wars related, and we're getting to enjoy this franchise we all love dearly together, that's all that matters. Last year had been different though, for many reasons. Some I'll get into soon, and I suppose that is why you're here. But initially, it had just been a shit day. We just weren't feeling it, you know. We all got off work around 2ish, and we planned to meet at my place to get into our usual Star Wars fun. 3 of our friend group, Sean, Nathan and Matthew, had been unavailable to join us due to other commitments. So that straight away kicked things off on a sour note. We did get together anyway, tried to make the best of things. We tossed ideas back and forth. Maybe we could just watch the movies. Nah, a little too late in the day to start a marathon that usually ends up going way over time, since we can't decide which extra bits to include. We shared a bit of a laugh on that note, reminiscing on the time we tricked our friend Matthew into watching a huge chunk of the Clone Wars series in between the prequels and the OT. He was a relatively new fan at that time, and it actually took a good few hours before he finally wised up and started begging us to put the next movie on. We just looked at him and said, "Hang on, this whole operation was your idea." Good times. That was a good year. I wished we could go back, relive those memories. Whatever we were trying to do here just wasn't it. We bounced back and forth between playing some Star Wars video games, watching random clips on YouTube, and generally just trying to get into the spirit of the day somehow. As the hours crawled on, however, we realised there was no salvaging this, and we eventually decided to just head out to a bar and grab some beers instead. Try and at least make something of the night. Sitting at one of our favourite pubs, the night began to take an upward turn. We weren't out to get plastered. In fact, we only ended up having a few drinks each. But it seemed just getting out of that dreary apartment was exactly what we needed. It wasn't long before we were nerding out again. I sipped my beer and watched on as Trev fiercely debated with Aaron over who really was the stronger Jedi. Anakin at his peak, or Luke during the events of the Legends novel Heir to the Empire. I just sat back and observed as the conversation inevitably devolved into a fierce argument that any rational bystander would have assumed involved some sort of ultimate personal betrayal. And so, the night went on. And although many heated debates just like that one unfolded throughout the evening, it was a rather unexpectedly pleasant end to what had been the most depressing Star Wars day in many years. The hour was rather late by the time we decided to finally pack it in and head home. I turned my head away in shame as a somewhat tipsy Aaron bowed his head and blurted out, "May the Force be with you," to the clearly weirded out young bar girl. Rolling my eyes and sighing out an apology on his behalf, I headed on out into the night with my friends. It was around 11 p.m. by now, and most places down the main strip were already closed. A shame. I was feeling a severe case of the munchies, and I would have loved nothing more than a big fat juicy kebab right about then. My stomach guiding me more so than anything else, I decided to head down another block or so, just to see if I could find any late night vendors still operating. On we strolled, looking for any signs of glowing yellow arches or perhaps Colonel Sanders' glorious face lighting up the night. A couple of blocks down, still no luck. There was nothing ahead of us now but darkness, so we took a left. I honestly didn't think much of my chances of finding anything down this way. We seemed to be wandering further and further away from any signs of life. The streetlights were thinning out, and our surroundings had transitioned from a well-established city centre to a rundown industrial zone. Half-constructed houses and corporate buildings lined the streets, sectioned off by flimsy scaffold fencing. I was just about to give up on the pursuit, turn back and head home, when Trev shouted an excitable, "Up there!" and began running up the street, making a beeline across the road and up to the corner. I followed his direction, and there I saw it. A subtle, yellowish glow coming from around the bend. That's got to be a Macca's, I thought, and I picked up the pace too. As we rounded the corner, however, there were no glorious fast food logos shining brightly in the night, but rather something I'm sure none of us were expecting. A movie theatre. I was taken aback, as of course, this was probably the last place I ever expected to see one. Smack in the middle of a run-down, industrialised part of the city, surrounded by pretty much nothing else. It didn't make sense. And yet, there it was. The building was odd too. Blocky construction and these huge grey walls. Situated out front was the typical ticket box, and as I looked closer, there was indeed a man in there, selling tickets for entry. I was thinking there might be a canteen in there, selling various snacks and stuff. Maybe some hot Dagwood dogs or burgers if we were lucky. We walked up to the entrance of the theatre. We were both amazed and excited by what we saw when we got to the front of the building. Lit up and in bold print read the words, "Tonight only, Star Wars plus Star Wars 2. Oh my God, we practically all said in unison. Okay, it made sense now, why this place was open so late. This must be a special May the 4th showing of Star Wars. The titling was a little weird. I didn't know if they meant A New Hope plus Empire or Phantom Menace plus Clones or something else. Well, whatever. We were all excited now. Our May the 4th was finally coming together the way it should have in the first place. Excitedly, we grabbed out our wallets and approached the ticket box. "How much for the movie?" I said to the guy behind the glass. He stared back at me with a bored expression on his face. Clearly he wasn't too thrilled about being here near on midnight to accommodate a bunch of nerds. "It's 2 movies, sir, and that will be 8 pence, he replied in a weird British accent. I chuckled in response. Okay, how much in dollars? My assumption that he had been making some kind of joke was clearly off, as he sighed, grabbed the $10 note I was holding, and spun around. He slammed his fist down on an old-looking cash register, something that genuinely looked like it belonged in an antique store. He pulled out a mountain of old-looking coins and poured them out before me. "Your change, sir." I just stared at the guy. Keep the change," I replied, before walking into the theatre. My friends wisely followed the same play, and we all made our way inside. The inside of the theatre was strange, to say the least. A small cafeteria sat in the centre of the room, and 4 staircases branched off to the upper floors from there. That must be where the cinemas were, I thought. I stepped up to the cafeteria, still hungry, which of course was the entire point of this expedition. There wasn't much that looked overly appealing. In fact, I didn't even know what half of it was. In the end, I settled on some popcorn and a drink. My friends grabbed themselves some snacks, and we were directed to cinema number 4, up the far staircase. Excited, we headed on up, and we were shown into the theatre by a well-dressed usher, sporting a slick suit and tie. They really were going for the retro vibes here. We scanned the room. There were about 20 or so others already seated, scattered throughout the rows, as people tend to do. We opted to take a seat in the back row. We got settled in and began talking quietly between ourselves, wondering which movies we were going to see. Before long, the lights began to dim and a large projector from the back of the room whirred to life. I couldn't believe I was about to watch Star Wars on the big screen like this. Sitting in this retrofied theatre with that big projector and the grainy display up on the screen, I almost felt like I was right back there in 1977. A moment later, the screen dimmed and the classic blue text reading, "A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away," flashed up on the screen before fading to black again. And then Star Wars. The bright yellow logo exploded onto the screen before drifting back into the infinite expanse of the galaxy. But something was very different about what we were watching. For one thing, the music was not John Williams' famous score. It was the Star Wars theme song, but it was entirely composed on piano. My friends and I looked at each other, each of us with that same what the hell expression on our faces, before shrugging and sitting back in our seats, continuing to watch. The opening crawl continued, but the titles were just as weird as the music. It read, Star Wars 1, Massacre. And that was literally it. Just those 5 words, in big, bold yellow lettering, scrolled up into space. It was becoming clear at this point that this was some kind of obscure fan-made film. Maybe we'd stumbled into some sort of Star Wars-themed film festival or something like that. Whatever. We were here now. We had paid. Let's just watch whatever this is, I thought. The text disappeared into the black expanse, and the camera did the typical pan down. A tiny planet came into view. One my friends and I, being massive Star Wars fans, instantly recognized as the Dagobah system. The green, mossy exterior, intertwined with patches of white swirls, was a dead giveaway. The camera sat fixated on the planet for an unusually long time, and I was just beginning to wonder if perhaps the projector was stuck or something, when suddenly the scene began to zoom into the planet's surface. There was no background music playing anymore, just a weirdly dull, ever-present hum. It took me a while to click as to what it was, longer than it should have. It was the buzz of an ignited lightsaber. As the scene continued to zoom in, another sound joined the steady drone. The sound of footsteps. Rhythmic, almost mesmerizing. The camera then quickly cut, so fast it actually made me jump a little, to a scene on the planet's surface. I recognized it immediately. Luke Skywalker stood firm within the dark side cave, his iconic blue lightsaber ignited and in hand. Okay, so despite the weird start, it seems we were watching Empire. At least I thought we were. The scene seemed different somehow, darker. And there was something off about Luke's stance, his demeanor. The footsteps continued to grow in volume, and soon became accompanied by the sound of Vader's robotic breathing mechanism. As the Dark Lord emerged from the shadows, Luke readied himself in preparation. This is where things stopped making sense entirely. I knew something was off already, obviously, but I knew for a fact this was not the same film I had grown up watching, when out of nowhere, Vader took an almighty swing at Luke. This was not the slow, calculated, almost medieval style of lightsaber dueling typical of the original trilogy. Vader was enraged, and he swung at Luke with all the anger and fury of a rabid animal. Luke fought back, with a skill set far beyond what he should have learned by this point in the films. I cringed back in horror as Luke, in one quick motion, sliced Vader's hand clean off. Vader quickly recovered, retrieving his weapon by way of a force pull. The fight continued on. Luke somehow managed to dominate the battle until he overpowered his father completely, striking at him in a flurry of attacks channeling all the anger and hatred of the dark side. As he continued striking at him, Vader could be heard crying out in pain beneath his mask, and it was honestly one of the most unsettling sounds I've ever heard. But this would not be the most horrifying scene that I would witness in this theatre. The camera slowly began to zoom out. Grey edges came into view, a border, and around it, various knickknacks and furniture. It was in a moment revealed that what we were watching had been taking place on somebody's television screen inside their home. The camera then slowly panned around, and what I saw next drew a horrified gasp from everybody in that theatre. We heard it before we visually registered what it was. Squelch, squelch, slash, squelch, slash, over and over again. And then the entire scene came into view. A man holding a kitchen knife and gripping tight another man right in front of it. Over and over, the knife was plunged into the man's body as the life drained from his eyes. The man with the knife was also lifeless, but in a different way. It was like looking into the eyes of a shark. There was no empathy in them, no emotion, nothing. We all watched on in disgust as this man continued to hack and slash at his victim. Eventually, he began slicing off limbs. The sheer strength with which he was doing this was inhuman. With a wicked swing, the man's arms flopped onto the ground, followed by the legs, and shortly after, the head, mimicking the role of Vader's dismembered head in the film. All of this played out before us in horrific detail, made worse by the total lack of any music. It was like watching it in real time. A few people had stood up and tried to walk out, but found the doors to be locked. So they just stood there, facing away from the screen, waiting for the doors to open up again. The scene remained still and silent. The man then kind of shuddered slightly, seemingly breaking out of his trance-like state. He looked around the room, staring at the macabre scene he had himself created. A scowl grew across his face, followed by an almost satisfied grin. The man then began creeping around the apartment, picking up the body parts and putting them into bags. He was cleaning up. It was slow, methodical, and we were forced to watch every moment of it. When he was finally done, he sat down on his couch, the camera fixating on him, shaky and unfocused, like some kind of handheld home video. It panned around before him and began to focus in on his eyes. A faint glow of yellow, just like those of Anakin's in Revenge of the Sith. He stared down the barrel of the camera for all of about 30 seconds straight before the scene finally snapped to black. The whispers in the theatre slowly grew into audible chatter. People rightfully confounded and horrified at what had just played out on screen. We considered getting up and leaving, but the folks who had tried to do so earlier, they were still just standing there up the back of the theatre, waiting for the doors to unlock. Clearly, they weren't going to until the end of the two films. the lights dimmed once again, and we just sat there, waiting to endure whatever was coming next. Again, the far, far away text faded in on the screen before fading back out again. And there it was again, that weird piano rendition of the Star Wars theme song as the logo blasted off into the void. The text was similarly weird like the first one, simply reading Star Wars 2 Game. Again, no plot description, just that weirdly cryptic title scrolling up underneath the logo before fading out into darkness. The camera panned off to the right this time, rather than dropping down, coming into focus not on a distant fictional planet, but rather Earth. It then cut rather quickly to a view outside of a house in a typical suburban area. It was kind of shaky again, as if being filmed in handheld. The camera slowly, ever so slowly approached the windows of the house. We sat there in anticipation, wondering what might be inside, but also wondering if we really wanted to know. Then, just before the camera reached the window, the scene cut. What we were looking at now was bizarre, even in the face of what we had seen so far. On screen stood what looked to be a Jedi, his lightsaber ignited, running through a very strange, murky landscape. But the animation was weird. It looked to be taken out of a video game, but it was like no Star Wars game I had ever played, and I had played them all. As the Jedi ran around, it was revealed that others were with him, a group of them, exploring this mysterious planet. The way they were moving further reinforced the idea that this footage was from an actual video game. Random jumps here and there, odd sideways steps and movements. It looked very similar to how the characters in Skyrim or Fallout would move. I was just about to turn to my friends and ask if they had ever played a game like this, when all of a sudden, the most ear-piercing scream came crackling through the speakers. A woman was crying out. The scene had cut once again. That shaky cameraman was back and was focused on a rather empty street corner with a white van parked outside a building. A woman, blindfolded, was thrown into the van, screaming all the while, before it took off at great speed. Then, just as quickly as before, the scene snapped back to where it had originally started. The shaky camera approaching the window of that house. Slowly, it continued to approach, until finally, the camera pressed up against the glass, focusing inside. A group of people were in there, running around the living and kitchen areas. It wasn't clear what they were doing, but it was clear that they were in some kind of a panic. One of them picked up the phone and was practically shouting into it, while the other was looking at something on a laptop. The others were just kind of standing around, freaked out, but not really knowing what to do, it seemed. After a while of this, and talking back and forth between themselves, one of them began to walk over to the window. He seemed to be looking straight towards the camera, but it's like he did not even see it. almost like he was looking through it. He looked out, a fear in his eyes, like he was staring his own death in the face, before retreating back into his friends. They all spoke among themselves. A couple of them started visibly crying. The camera then pulled back, panning out and around, and we saw what had frightened them. 1, 2, 3, 4 black vans parked along the street outside. I'm sure nothing good lay inside of them. The sliding doors then began to open, and 2 men climbed out of each vehicle, dressed all in black. The scene then abruptly cut once again, this time to a kind of security feed type camera. The scene was grayscale, but it showed the boys inside their house in what looked to be a basement. They were gaming on their computers. There was no sound here. I don't mean just a lack of music, as had been the case throughout this entire weird viewing, but there was no sound at all. Just a static hum, typical of security feeds. To this day, I still cannot tell you which one was more difficult to watch. The gory bloodfest in the first video, or the sheer silence of this one. It happened so suddenly. 1 second, they were sitting there on their computers. The next, they were convulsing as gas began to rise. They tried to escape, but the doors were bolted tight. Minutes on end ticked by as these poor boys involuntarily danced around, expelling their bodily fluids and collapsing to their knees, eventually falling flat onto the ground. A couple of them let out a few more kicks and spasms before eventually becoming still. One of them, just one, managed to cover his mouth with his shirt and stand up on one of the desks. This salvation lasted as long as it took one of these men to kick down the door and bury a bullet in his brain, his body immediately going heavy and slumping down over a couple of the PC towers. The man then stood there in the doorway, waiting for the gas to clear, before slowly and calmly walking on inside and up to the camera showing the feed. He stared into it, seemingly right at us, before lifting his pistol and shooting the camera. The screen went black, and the lights in the theater came back on. We just looked at each other, dumbfounded. We were no strangers to horror, but that was too much, too confronting. It felt too real. The doors finally opened up, and everyone poured out of that cinema, voicing their disgust to the usher on the way out. My friends and I left, went our separate ways back home, and we never really spoke about any of this ever again. As much as I've tried to push it out of my mind though, the whole experience has left me feeling quite empty, beaten. I don't understand. Why us? Why did we need to see it? Who did this? Why were we targeted? Was the entire point just the pointlessness of it all? That life just ends, regardless of the joy you feel for the things you love, or perhaps in spite of it. I cannot say for sure if it's all connected, but I can tell you, I am very, very worried that it is. Over the past year, since stumbling on that late night viewing, Every one of my friends, with the sole exception of Aaron, have disappeared from my life. I don't mean we drifted apart. I mean they're just gone. Lately, I've been seeing things. Shadows. At work. On the streets. Even inside my apartment. Little figures out the corner of my eye. There 1 minute and gone the next. At least, I think so. It's the kind of flashes that make you question if what you're seeing is real, or if you're losing your mind. I really don't think it's the latter though, as much as I'd love to believe it is. I have been back by that theatre many times over the past year, just to check on things. It's always been locked up tight. Until recently. May the 4th is coming up fast, and the signs outside the building are back, and they have me incredibly unsettled. 5 words that are keeping me awake at night. Coming soon. Star Wars Trilogy.